In my mother's kitchen, everything was silent except for the ticking of the old wall clock from my childhood. Time seemed to be stuck in that ticking. It was not passing, only repeating. My father was buried in the newspaper as usual, frowning at the news as if looking at it for the first time in years. My sister Olivia was buried in her phone, her eyes shining in the screen light. Was she watching stories or other people's lives? I don't know, and I didn't dare ask. The tea in front of me had gone cold. The mists falling on the tea were disappearing as quickly as my childhood memories reflected in the glass of the window. When did we become so alienated? How can people who grew up in the same house and ate at the same table become so distant from each other? That's when I realized we were strangers living in the same house. My mother spoke without turning her head as she stirred the food on the stove. "Claire, I may have overdone it with the olive oil. You don't like it, but Olivia loves it." There was a hidden preference in the sentence. "You don't like it," as if to add that I didn't need to care anyway. Olivia's taste came first. It always had been. There was the shadow of years in that sentence. Even when I was a child, Olivia's plates were carefully prepared, while the food I didn't like stayed on the plate. No one ever said it out loud, but the language of the table always made a distinction. Olivia smiled without looking up from the phone. "It's no problem, Mom. I'll eat it all anyway." And me? I was quiet, like I always was. I wanted to speak, but I didn't know what to say. Should I say, "I'm here too"? How strange. Sometimes you feel so invisible in your own home that you can't be heard. We sat down at the table and my mother stopped for a moment as she put the plates in front of us. She served my plate a little reluctantly. Even the movement of her hands whispered to me, "You're used to it, you'll manage." When Olivia cried as a child, I was the first to wipe her tears. Not my mother, not my father. It was me. The weight of being a big sister was placed on my shoulders at an early age. I was the one who took care of her, helped her with her homework, covered her up at night. But as the years passed, I took refuge in her shadow. I was just a dim lamp next to the shining Olivia. "By the way, Olivia's project has been chosen," my mother suddenly announced. Olivia looked up and giggled. "It was a small thing, actually. It's like an ad agency competition, and I made it to the top 3. Mom almost put down her plate and clapped. Her eyes lit up. "See? This girl always finds a way. She's always determined, isn't she, Claire?" "Yes," I said, my voice caught in my throat. "She really does." Dad still hadn't put down the newspaper, but I noticed he was looking at Olivia out of the corner of his eye. A slight smile, approval, pride. I can't remember the last time I saw him smile like that. Maybe when I started college. But that was short-lived. Because my job, no matter how successful I was too serious. I was always the quiet success in this family. But sometimes silence turns into invisibility. When dinner was over, I listened to the ticking of the clock in the kitchen. At the same time, the 3 of us seemed to be in different times. Olivia was making plans for the future. My mother seemed to long for the past, but she only remembered the ones she chose. My father. He was still in the house, but his absence was felt the most. I was just where I was, neither in the past nor in the future. That night in my room, I looked at an old family photo. We were little then. Olivia on my lap, my parents smiling. I realized that the peace in that frame was now only an illusion, that maybe even then reality was covered with smiles. Maybe the first crack didn't happen that day in the kitchen. It happened years ago, but I felt it that day. That I was cracking in the same rhythm as the ticking of the wall clock. Another quiet evening at the dinner table. My mother carefully divides the chicken sauté onto everyone's plate. It's as if this ritual is the last tie that holds our family together. My father straightens the forks. As usual, no one makes direct eye contact. That evening was no different from any other evening, until Olivia dropped her fork on the plate and threw words into the air. "I'm moving abroad," she said. casual and neutral, as if it was going to rain. At that moment, all the plates on the table froze. It was as if time stopped for a moment, then quickly turned back to Olivia. Mom's eyebrow went up, then her eyes lit up. What? What? Really? You mean it? Oh, yeah, London. The agency is opening a branch there, and a few people have been selected. I've been invited. I'm leaving in 2 weeks. 2 weeks? So clear. So sudden. They acted as if everyone knew. My dear, I knew you would come to such places one day, echoed in my ears right after my mother's words. Even my father smiled. I can't remember the last time I saw him proud of someone. I was petrified in my seat, my fork in my hand. I was a stranger, as if I had been invited to the table for the first time. Olivia kept talking. Actually, the offer came 2 weeks ago. I didn't want to say anything until it was finalized, but I signed the contract today, so it's finalized. So she's been carrying this around for 2 weeks, not just for herself, not to the family, and not for me. I was the pioneer of everything in this house. I was the first one to be consulted about university choices, the one who followed up on my father's blood pressure reports, the one who reminded my mother about prescription days, the one who wrote down the house's deficiencies in a notebook. I had always been the thinker, but now she had become the achiever. Something twisted inside me. It wasn't jealousy. No, not at all. It's just a twinge that comes when I think I deserve the applause. You make invisible contributions for years and no one notices. But someone comes on stage, says a few sentences, and everyone gives him a standing ovation. That's exactly what happened that night. Olivia's voice was still speaking. When I leave, I'll stay there with a roommate for a while, and then maybe I'll get my own place. It's all so new, but I'm so excited. My mother's eyes filled with tears. My daughter, my Olivia. You don't know how proud I am of you. London. It's a wonderful city. Dad smiled. You've thought well. When you're young, you should take advantage of such opportunities. Then he turned his eyes to me. Claire, when did you go to England? It was 5 years ago, wasn't it? It was as if he was trying to take credit for reminding me of my own experience abroad. At the time, I had never seen my own departure celebrated in such a way, and I had been asked many times, does it make sense to go so far alone? Now it's, come on, Olivia, go out into the world. Olivia was at the center of the enthusiasm. A new door was opening in her life. But as that door was opening, my door was softly closing. And that's when I realized I was no longer just living in this house. I was losing my place in it. Later that night, while I was doing the dishes, Olivia was on her phone, making her visa appointment. My mom was making plans for her stuff. Let's get a suitcase. Claire has a big suitcase, right? Of course she can use it, I said involuntarily. Olivia looked up. You don't mind, do you? At that moment, I wanted to ask, when was it ever okay for me? But I just shook my head. Non bada. I gave him my suitcase, along with my own silence. As I lay in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, I thought, Olivia is not really leaving this house. I've already been slowly sent away. Olivia was always the lighter one. She was one of those people who lit up the room. She stood out in any room she entered, and when someone told a joke, her smile was the first thing everyone looked at. Her hair was always wavy, her sentences ornate. Whenever I looked at family photos, Olivia was always in the center. I was a bit on the edge. Maybe that's why I never tried to be like her, because I knew her place was defined outside of me. I was always the responsible one, the one who set the table when my mom had guests over, the one who quietly reminded my dad when he forgot a doctor's appointment, comforting Olivia when she had a nervous breakdown. Sometimes I watched her cry with test anxiety, and then I was late for my own test, but no one remembers that because I didn't cry. I didn't cry. I was quiet. I was resilient. I was invisible. These roles were quietly handed out to us. It was as if a die was thrown at the moment of our birth, and I drew the resilient die. When something broke in Olivia's life, everyone panicked. When her heart broke, the mood in the house changed. But when I was hurt, it was usually brushed off with, "Claire will be fine." They weren't wrong. I would recover, but that didn't mean I wasn't hurt. Even as a child. When Olivia came home from school upset, my mother would cook her favorite rice pudding. When I lost my purse that same day, I'd get a simple, "Be a little careful." The comparison wasn't overt, but it was implicit in every behavior. Olivia's sentences were colorful, mine practical. She was the dreamer, I was the realist. She was creative, I was hardworking. She was free-spirited, I was methodical. But how could two children who grew up in the same house fit into such different molds? They couldn't, so I overflowed. Inside. When it came time to choose a university, Olivia wanted the conservatory. My parents were against it at first, but then they said, "This is her passion," and they accepted it. When I chose financial engineering, no one was surprised. In fact, they said, "It's the right course for you." No congratulations or expressions of pride. Just conformity to expectation. And then life went on. Olivia exhibited. She met colorful people. Her circle of friends were artists. Mine were people who carried an agenda and drank their coffee black. One bohemian, one punctual. Years passed, we grew up, but our roles didn't change. Last year, on Olivia's birthday, my mother said to everyone in the living room, "Olivia, you bring joy to this house. You are the color of the house." Then she turned to me. "Claire is our mind. We can't plan without her." At that moment, I realized something. They saw me as a tool of intelligence. My heart, my emotions, the fragility inside me were not taken into account at all. I was the planner, the solver, the fixer, but I was just tired. One does not always compete with what one thinks one is compared to. Sometimes one loses quietly within oneself. That day, on Olivia's birthday, my hands trembled as I gave her her present, because inside was a note I had written with real vulnerability. "Sometimes I was jealous of your color, but I've always loved you." I don't know if she read that note, but we never talked about it. Sometimes brotherhood consists of unspoken sentences. Comparisons are not only made from the outside. Over time, one starts to divide oneself within oneself. The question, "Why am I not like this?" opens the deepest wound. Maybe that's why Olivia's every achievement was not an admiration for me, but a painful reminder. I wanted to be loved too, but I was never light enough to express it. Because my love was silent, like shadows. Its presence goes unnoticed, but its absence creates darkness. It was a Saturday morning. I was home alone. My parents had gone out, and Olivia had been staying with friends for days on the pretext of preparing to move. The silence was heavy, but familiar. It was different from the silence I had heard as a child. Back then, when there was no sound, there was peace. Now, silence was a kind of absence. On the pretext of cleaning the house, I opened the chest of old things. It was a bit dusty, obviously untouched for years. Inside the chest were my mother's notebooks from her youth, my father's worn watch, and a thick photo album. The leather edges of the album were cracked, and the edges of some pages were yellowed. Time left its mark not only on people, but also on memories. I opened the album, and on the first page was the day Olivia was born. Even as a baby, she seemed to attract the light. Her blanket is red, her smile is huge. In my mother's arms, my father standing over her. And me? I wasn't in the picture. I kept going. It's Olivia's first birthday. Dad put his hand on her back as he blew out the candles. There was something ceremonial about the smiles in that shot. Colorful balloons in the background, a table full of presents. I'm in a corner, blurry. You can't see my face. As I turned the pages, I got stuck. The first school performance, Olivia on stage in her ballet outfit. It's of my mom hugging her. There's even a date written underneath, the day Olivia became a star of the stage. My mom drew a heart next to it. I didn't have a graduation photo, but that day my mom stood next to me and fixed my hair. I remember. But that photo isn't here. Maybe it wasn't taken. Maybe it was taken, but not printed. Maybe it was printed, but not deemed important. As the photographs progressed, I remained like a shadow. Olivia blowing out her birthday cake every year, jumping rope at a family picnic, posing at an exhibition opening. I was always out of the frame, blurred or absent. Under one photo, it was written, "Olivia, Olivia, Olivia," and I was there, but I was absent. Sometimes one gets lost not in childhood memories, but in what is missing. What they didn't see hurts as much as what they did see. In a photograph, my father smiles and lifts Olivia up. Olivia is laughing in the air. I studied that frame for a long time, as if the happiness there was not mine. In fact, it's as if that happiness was made possible by my absence. Maybe if they had enlarged the frame, they could have caught me in a corner, watching quietly. When I reached the end of the pages, I was in the center in only one frame. In high school, we went to a wedding as a family. I'm wearing a black dress. Classic, straight hair. Next to me is Olivia in a colorful dress. I remember feeling beautiful that day, but even that paled in comparison to Olivia. As I closed the album, I felt a lump in my throat. How much has happened and how little has been recorded? Or, of those that were recorded, I wasn't in most of them. This realization wasn't a kind of ignorance. It was much heavier. It was like unseen labor, like the burden silently carried by a child. Sometimes the greatest deprivation is not being absent from a frame, but not being remembered, even if you are there. I started to ask myself, was I absent or was I really ignored? Memories are sometimes jarring, but what's more shocking is that those memories are always centered on someone else. I made a decision that day that as Olivia's things were being packed away, I would make a distinction within myself. I exist too. But I don't have to shout to be visible. I just have to stand still. If people want to see you, they'll see you. If they don't, it's not about you anyway. When my grandfather died, everyone at the funeral burst into tears, even Olivia. And yet, for the last 2 years, he hardly called her at all. I would call him every Friday morning and chat. Sometimes I'd send a package. Sometimes I just wanted to hear his voice. Grandpa and I had a special bond. "You are the wall of this family," he used to tell me as a child. "No one writes on it, but everyone leans on you." A few months after he passed away, I was told that there would be a family meeting about his summer house. It was the small, stone-walled, 2-room house my grandfather had built in Gulkova. Surrounded by bougainvillea, it was my childhood escape. For Olivia, the backdrop for her Instagram photos. On the day of the meeting, my mother came into the living room with a tray of tea. My father, as usual, was silent. He was sitting in his armchair, watching the proceedings from afar. Olivia was prepared with a tablet in front of her, as confident as if she were an executive giving a presentation. "We need to make a decision about Grandpa's house," Olivia said. "Yes," I said, "we'll probably all use it together. Take turns. Maybe we'll go together sometimes." "Actually," Olivia said, "this is what I thought. Let's put the house in our name. But I'll take care of the maintenance, the taxes. It would be good to have someone to use it regularly." I felt a little warm inside when she said ours. I nodded silently, but a few minutes later, a sentence from my mother's mouth shattered everything. "Olivia already has the deed in her name. Besides, you have a job. You can't deal with her." I didn't understand for a moment. "The deed? She took it over? What do you mean?" Olivia averted her eyes. She turned off the tablet screen. "We did it at the notary last week. We talked to the mother. It was easier." The silent shock on my face may not have been overwhelming, but it echoed inside me like an earthquake. Why didn't I know? Mom waved her hands like she was washing them. "Claire, you're already busy at the office. Besides, Olivia wanted to take care of it, and we said, okay, you can't deal with the deed and the procedure now." "You can't." You're already busy." We said okay. I was never part of that we. I was never part of that decision. And worst of all, nobody wanted me to be part of it. We hadn't talked anyway. I was only comfortable because I was silent. The more I was silent, the more space I opened up. The more I was silent, the more I took on the burden. The more I was silent, the more I was left out of the decision. At that moment, these people I had known for years seemed foreign to me for the first time. It was as if a stranger had entered the room, and I realized how we they were. Olivia continued with a smile. "Look, don't worry. Come and stay whenever you want. You'll have the key. Don't think of it as partners. It's not a problem in the family." No, it's not. It is. Because it wasn't about the key. It was about who owned the door and who could decide when and who could knock on it. When my grandfather told me about that house, he always said, "I wanted to leave a memory for both of you to inherit." But now, even that memory had been written in someone's household. The physical remnant of a shared past had been appropriated by the decision of one person. Perhaps what hurt me the most that day was not Olivia's use of the word we to refer only to herself. It was the phrase my mother used to explain the situation. "You don't try. Haven't I been struggling for years?" Reminding me about the bills at home, taking my father's medication, organizing Olivia's CV. Wasn't it me who was told you don't bother? So work was only measured by what was visible. Silent labor, off the books. I was alone in the car on my way home that evening. I looked out the window. The roads of Gokova came to life in my mind. I remembered the day I planted oranges in the garden with my grandfather. I was little. A shovel in one hand, the smell of soil in the other. That day, he looked at me and said, "This house is not on anyone's deed. It will be in your heart. But remember, if one day something that is rightfully yours is taken away from you in silence, it will also be erased from the deed." If one day you too realized how your silence, how being silent makes you invisible, this story will be familiar to you. When I bent over the computer screen, what I was really looking for was an old PDF file. I was trying to find the tax document my mother had sent me. As I was flipping through the documents, I came across an email chain that I had accidentally opened. Title, "Let's Talk About the Frame." Sender, Olivia. Recipient, my mom. Date, just 3 weeks after my grandfather passed away. Something held me there. As my eye traveled along the lines, I felt a familiar tightness in my throat. Olivia had written, "I don't think Claire is interested in that painting. Even if Grandpa gave it to her, she wouldn't understand its meaning. It would be more appropriate for you to have it. Anyway, if it's on the wall at home, more people will see it. If Claire keeps it, it will be forgotten." The lines were written not in my eyes, but deep in my heart. The seconds stopped. The world seemed to slow down. They were short, cold, and skillfully written sentences. But what flowed from the words was not just logic. It was contempt, exclusion, and ownership. I knew the painting in question very well. It represented the most special bond between my grandfather and me. I spent hours in his studio when I was little. I loved the smell of paint. And when he was painting it, he would often say to me, "This painting should be on the wall of someone who thinks like you. Its colors look complicated from the outside, but there is an order inside, just like you." He willed that painting to me. That's for sure. He told me personally, but she didn't leave a formal will, so it was just words. A week ago, I saw it at my mom's house in Olivia's room. It was hanging on the wall. The glass had just been replaced. I didn't say anything at the time. I thought maybe it was a momentary relic, maybe a temporary installation. But now I knew. It wasn't a mistake or a coincidence. Olivia had deliberately, willfully taken that painting away from me. And in doing so, she had clearly written down what she thought of me. She wouldn't understand. When did Olivia start to despise me so much? Maybe she always had. I just realized it too late. Sometimes a person can withstand a blow from the outside, but a jolt from within shatters him. This was that moment of disintegration, because this was not just a painting. This was my invisibility documented. I didn't turn off the screen, I just put my head in my hands and just stayed there for a while. There was an emptiness in my heart, but it was also very heavy. Because in Olivia's eyes, I wasn't just worthless. I was also incompetent, uncaring, and even incapable of understanding. Even more painful? My mother had received this email and remained silent. She approved, obviously, because Olivia still had the painting. At that moment, a voice inside me said, "Why do you always keep quiet, Claire? Do you only realize after everything has happened? When are you going to speak up? When will you stand up for yourself?" That painting was like a visualization of the countless memories I had with my grandfather. Even though I inherited nothing, his promise to me was enough as a memory. But now, even that memory had been taken from me in an email. I visited my mother in the evening. As I sat in the living room, my eyes fell on the painting again. The colors are still the same, but this time it was telling me something else. Even what belongs to you passes to someone else when you shut up. I couldn't help myself. "Why did you hang this painting in Olivia's room?" Mom pretended to be surprised. "Olivia wanted it. I thought she talked to you too. A lie. A clear and silent lie. I said my grandfather gave it to me." There's no formal will, Claire. And Olivia treasures the painting. You're not really into that kind of thing anyway. There's that sentence, "You're already..." The sentence that always puts me in a mold, traps me in a fixed role. Maybe the biggest breaks happen in one-word sentences. That day, I felt that Olivia was disrespecting not only me, but also my grandfather. Because what gave that painting its real meaning was not that it was on the wall, but whose wall it was on. I made my decision one morning while looking in the mirror. The circles of fatigue that appeared under my eyes were as if the emotions I was trying to suppress inside me were leaking out. This tiredness was not just from work, lack of sleep, the pace of life. It was the fatigue of holding back the words that were building up inside me. I had to talk to Olivia. It could no longer be postponed. I couldn't retreat any longer in that silent war where I was ignored, excluded, where my boundaries were expanded by my silence. I asked her to meet me at a cafe. The place was crowded, but the buzz inside softened the sharp edges of the conversations. It was sheltered in a way. Maybe that's why she agreed. We were both afraid of things getting out of control. Olivia had her coffee in her hand when we sat down at the table. Her eyes occasionally drifted to the phone. She acted as if this was going to be an ordinary conversation, not a confrontation. But I knew very well that this was no ordinary moment. "Why did you buy the painting?" I asked her directly. He hesitated for a moment, then he took a sip of his coffee. "Is it a picture of my grandfather? We talked to your mother. It wouldn't be appropriate in the living room, so she said she wanted to give it to me. But you know she wanted to give me that painting. Grandpa told you that." Olivia rolled her eyes. "Claire, you're making such a big deal out of everything. It's just a painting. How interested are you in art anyway?" That sentence was like a sharp knife. "You're already..." The starting point of everything. The sentence that invalidates every explanation. You already... "When did you start making decisions about me, Olivia?" I said quietly but clearly. "What decisions? The summer house, the painting, the way you ignore me at family gatherings, the way you talk about everything as us, when it's really just you, without asking me, without consulting me. It's as if I'm a background figure relegated to the margins of this family." Olivia shrugged her shoulders. A cold smile crossed her face. "You've always victimized yourself, Claire, always dramatizing, but it's just life happening. I'm making my own path. Why does that bother you so much?" And that's when I took the biggest hit, because the thing that hurt me the most was that it didn't matter to him at all, that he still didn't understand me. I wasn't interested in victimization. I just wanted to be visible. I wanted to exist as an individual, not as a big sister who had been supporting, sacrificing, and quietly finding solutions for years. I said, "To you, I've always been the rational one, haven't I?" Olivia nodded. "Because you are. But have you ever thought that I was forced to be rational? Maybe one day I wanted to leave the house crying. Maybe I wanted to say, 'I'm tired,' but I couldn't. Because when you fell, everyone rushed to pick you up. When I fell, there was only silence." Olivia was silent. For the first time, she didn't look away from me. But her defense reflex kicked in again. I didn't do anything malicious. Everyone is responsible for their own lives. You could have said no. You could have spoken up. Nobody told you to keep quiet. This was a classic reversal sentence. Nobody told you. But sometimes nobody tells you anything, because they have already memorized long ago what is expected of you. I kept quiet because I was always made to feel like that was my place. Stay out of the limelight, but take care of everything. Take the burden when necessary, but don't talk. And now, when I try to draw boundaries, I'm a dramatizer? Olivia's expression slowly changed. There was a slight flush in her eyes, a tremor on her lips. But the next sentence froze the moment like ice. "I don't know, Claire. Maybe we've always been like this. You think deep, I stay on the surface. I choose to go with the flow instead of breaking. Olivia's lightness may have come from her courage to stay on the surface, but while I was drowning in the depths, her lightness was just extra weight to keep me sinking. That conversation solved nothing, but it revealed everything. Because sometimes the brother who thinks he did nothing inflicts the greatest wound, and sometimes that wound is healed not by talking, but by acceptance. I couldn't sleep. Lately, the nights had become alien to me. My mind is crowded, my body tired. But something inside me is always on the alert, like something will happen and I'll miss it, or vice versa. Something happened, but I still don't understand. It was an impulse that night when I opened the box in the closet. I had put a few things my grandfather had left me, and I hadn't touched them since I moved in. I had to distance myself from my own past because if I touched it, it hurt. But this time there was something else. An opening. Maybe it was the first night I was ready to face it. The objects from the box were placed on my desk in order. An old fountain pen, a silver lighter, a black and white photograph, and a small leather-bound notebook. I started to turn the pages slowly. First shopping lists, some old poems, short essays, and then an undated page came before me. At the top of the page was my name. It was handwritten. Claire. Quiet but deep. Olivia is like the wind, visible but ephemeral. My hand trembled. It was as if my grandfather had written a letter to this night many years ago. I read the page for so long that the words were etched in my mind, silent but deep, like the wind, visible but transient. The place given to me in those lines was precious, even though I was silent for the first time. For the first time, my depth was recognized in someone's eyes, not just as a man of duty, not just as a fixer. I was seen with the weight of my presence, the meaning of my silence. My eyes welled up, because this was the first time I felt that someone really saw me. All my life, I have always been defined through someone else, through Olivia, through the mother, through the balance of the house. But these lines were just about me. No comparisons, no praise. But there was a genuine recognition. As I read that page, I met the Claire of the past, the little girl who sat at my grandfather's knee, flipping through books, quietly asking questions. It was as if she had finally been heard. I was bored at every family dinner where Olivia's lightness was admired. I had been taught that it was wrong to appear too deep, as if I was too complicated. Don't think too much, they would say whenever I approached an issue from a different perspective. Olivia dazzled with short sentences. But that night, in my grandfather's notebook, it was written that thinking too much wasn't worthless. It was special. He said it in a low voice. I kept turning the pages, and there were a few more lines about Olivia. Olivia is like light. It hits and passes. Claire is like the earth. She grows flowers silently. This analogy tore me apart again, because I had realized over the years that growing flowers was not flashy for anyone, but in this notebook, those flowers had been seen. I thought of the carnations we had planted together in the garden years ago. Olivia had chosen them because she liked their color, but I was the one who hoed, watered, calculated the sun angles. We planted the flowers together, but I was the one who grew them. It was like a metaphor for our lives. That night, I felt like I was talking to my grandfather's notebook. I saw you, he was saying. You were silent, but I heard you. It was the first time someone told me that the silence inside me meant something. There was wind outside. It was like Olivia. It blew hard, but I was inside, deep in my own soil, and for the first time I heard my own inner voice so clearly. That night, I made a decision. I would no longer be Claire just doing her job. Just because I was not visible, I could not be ignored. I existed too, with my silence, my depth, my patience. I put my grandfather's notebook on my bedside table. I couldn't sleep without reading those lines over and over again. Claire is quiet but deep. Olivia is like the wind, visible but transient. And that night, for the first time, I felt that I really existed. I first looked at that painting when I was a child. It hung in my grandfather's study just above the fireplace. The colors were faded, but something stirred inside you when you looked at it. It was a landscape in step tones that at first glance seemed ordinary. A dried tree, cracked earth, and faint mountains in the background. But something was missing, or too much. I couldn't name it then. I could only feel it. It was as if this painting was speaking to me. Years later, when I saw that the painting was now in Olivia's room, an old connection was broken. It wasn't just a frame that was taken from me. It was a bridge of meaning between me and my grandfather. And that bridge had been quietly crossed by someone else. But there was still a void left inside me. I couldn't quite figure out why I felt such a deep attachment, why my grandfather wanted to give me that painting, why I felt that Olivia would never understand him. One morning, online, I enlarged the faded signature in the corner of the painting. It read, A Farit. After much research, I found out that the painter was still alive, surprisingly living in Istanbul. An old artist, he was no longer holding exhibitions or taking commissions. But in an interview, he said, I keep track of who has some of my paintings. That sentence gave me courage. I wrote him a letter, sincere, long, respectful. I talked about my grandfather, that painting, my childhood. 2 weeks later, I received an elegant reply. It was typewritten, with his signature in blue ink. The letter said, Your grandfather said that painting was for Claire. That's how he described it. She has a quiet curiosity in her. This painting is like her, simple, but it carries a secret. That's why I put a butterfly in the bottom left corner. I knew the others wouldn't notice, but she would. I felt myself trembling as I read the words. Lower left corner, a little butterfly. A detail that I had looked at for years and not noticed. A detail that only I should have noticed. This was not a test or a secret message. It was a silent vote of confidence in me. That painting was not just a landscape, it was a narrative. It was a representation of my silence that was buried inside me but could not be projected outward. And my grandfather realized this years ago, wordlessly, in color. I went straight into Olivia's room. No one was home that day. I stood in front of the painting, dusted it off, leaned over to the bottom left corner, and there it was. A butterfly. So faint it was almost invisible among the dried leaves. It was small, graceful, and so quiet that no one had ever noticed it. At that moment, tears came to my eyes, because for the first time, a trace was screaming that it belonged to me. A brushstroke said what no one else had said. My grandfather recognized me. He had seen me. My invisible endeavor, which I couldn't explain in words for years, was hidden in the wings of that butterfly. The meaning of the painting changed in that moment. It no longer mattered only because it was my right, but because it was the thing that told me. No matter how much Olivia cleaned it, she couldn't understand it unless she saw that butterfly. Maybe that's why it would never belong to her. That night, I made a note in Grandpa's notebook. Today I spoke to the butterfly, and for the first time the silence inside me resonated. Thank you. Attributing so much meaning to a work of art may seem like an exaggeration to outsiders, but there are some things. You don't choose them. They choose you. They reflect your soul and return to you like wordless letters. What my grandfather left me was not just the painting. It was the power of being seen. And with that power, I said to myself for the first time, I am not incomprehensible. It is not only words that speak to me. I am the one who recognizes the deep. That dinner at Olivia's house was planned as a small family get-together. At least that was the message. But when I walked in, a strange tension rose in me. Every corner of the house had been meticulously organized. Special candlesticks on the table, color-coordinated napkins, the aroma of roasted meat mingling with the smell of caramelized onions. Olivia had taken care of every detail. My mother was sitting on the sofa in the living room. My father was by the window, quietly watching the garden. The table had not yet been set. There was a vague tension on everyone, but they covered it with grace. Olivia smiled when she saw me. That familiar, everything's fine smile. Claire, welcome. You look beautiful. Come and sit down, she said. I smiled, nodded slightly, but the wave was already surging inside me. Once at the table, the conversation moved on to the usual topics. Olivia's business plans, Mom's tomatoes in the garden, Dad's idea of moving to the cottage after retirement. Everything was so ordinary that I could almost believe it. It was as if the deed to the summer house hadn't been given to one person, as if the painting my grandfather bequeathed to me hadn't been hung on someone else's wall, as if all the burdens I had kept silent for years as a big sister had never happened. But I couldn't be silent anymore. When it was my turn to be served at the table, I held the fork in my hand. I didn't pass it to anyone. For a moment, the conversation stopped. Eyes turned not to me, but to my hand holding the fork in the air. I took a deep breath, and then I said it. I am not a substitute in this family. The sentence sat on the table. It was harsh. It was unexpected. It was as if a metallic clang was heard from all the plates. My mother looked at me without putting down her spoon. What do you mean, Claire? I continued in a calm but clear voice. I mean, for years I've been the one who just completes, who keeps quiet, who manages everything. When Olivia asks for something, everyone mobilizes. But when I say something, I'm either not heard or I'm told, Claire will take care of it. And yet here I am. I'm not just someone to be remembered when needed. Olivia grimaced at first. Then she became defensive. Did it really have to come to this? You say it's a family dinner, but... This is a family dinner, Olivia. That's why I'm saying it here, because I've been silent for years, just to get along in this family. But now I want everything inside me to spill out onto this table, because you've only heard Olivia. Every moment of my silence you took as comfort and put a little more burden on me. My father moved slightly, like a whisper, breaking the silence for the first time. Claire, you were always our balance. No, Father. Being stable doesn't mean being invisible. Balance doesn't mean having to suppress your feelings. I'm tired of being the balance. I just want to experience my own feelings. Mom, in her classic way, Daughter, let's not talk about this now. It's something to think about. No, Mom, this should be talked about now, because everything is the way it is because it wasn't talked about. That painting, that summer house, Olivia's emails, my ostracization. These aren't just isolated incidents. They are proof of who I am in your eyes. In that moment, for the first time, the silence belonged to them, not to me. Olivia looked away. I never wanted to exclude you, but you always kept yourself on the sidelines. Because that's where my place has always been, Olivia. I didn't stand on the sidelines. I was placed on the sidelines. I choked on the words, but I didn't tremble. For the first time, the deepest ache inside me was being put into words. And in that moment, eyes turned not to me, but to what I said for the first time. Silently but powerfully. The table remained silent. Everyone's fork was in the air, and the words hung in the void. I stood up. There is a life accumulated in me, a self that is too real to be explained only by the role of big sister. I will no longer silence that self, and I was the first to leave the table, but this time not defeated, but liberated. After that dinner at Olivia's house, there was no break in my life. The break had already happened. That night was just the name of that break. When I got home, I closed the door slowly, put my bag on the floor, and threw myself on the couch without taking off my shoes. For the first time in all those years when everyone talked, but no one really heard, I spoke. And they were really quiet. But this silence did not comfort me, because the burden inside me was still waiting to be moved. The next morning, I turned off my phone, unsubscribed from my social media accounts, silenced notifications in the family group, didn't answer calls. Did anyone call? Yes, I did. But I didn't answer any of them, because what I needed to hear was an apology, an acceptance, or just an "I really understand." But the people on the other end of the phone were just waiting for me to get back to normal. I didn't talk to anyone for a month. The first week, my habits attacked me. I couldn't stop checking the phone in my hand, not out of fear, am I missing something, but out of hope. Has someone finally understood me? But no message, no call could carry that hope. In the second week, silence began to spread through my body. At first it was uncomfortable. When the hum of the outside world stops, your own inner voice gets louder. And sometimes that voice is not pleasant. Aren't you exaggerating too much? Maybe they're right. Still, silence is not the answer. But then I realized that the voice belonged not to me, but to the good girl stereotype that had been imposed on me for years. My inner voice, which had been silent for years, waiting for approval, struggling to be seen, was now poking its head out from its corner. For the first time, I really started talking to her. The third week, I started therapy. The therapy room was at first a stranger's room. Neutral colors, a faint smell of incense, a woman carrying a notepad, and me in front of her, whose words were slowly unraveling. At the end of the first session, the word boundaries was written in my notebook. I learned that to draw a boundary was not to break the relationship, but to respect yourself. It was not selfish to draw a boundary. In fact, it was the opposite. A boundary was the line of one's right to survive. Claire, if someone shuts you up, even if they don't tell you to shut up, that's a boundary violation, my therapist said. But I never learned to say no, I said. Every yes you don't say no to is a lie you tell yourself. That sentence stuck with me. How many yeses I had said. Yes, I'll take care of it. Yes, it's okay. Yes, you can keep it. Yes, I'll talk to you later. And those yeses had exhausted me. In the fourth week, the silence gave way to clarity. I was alone in my house, but for the first time, loneliness didn't feel like emptiness. I could connect not only with others, but also with myself. Thinking without sound while drinking my coffee in the morning, reading a book in the dim light in the evening, sometimes just watching the ceiling. All of these were not actions, but forms of healing. I realized in this process, sometimes the ties that tire you the most are the ones you feel you belong to the most. Family, brotherhood, deep-rooted ties. But belonging is not always a healthy place. Sometimes it's just a habit, and habits are the silent captives. During that month, I created a space for myself, not just a physical space, but an emotional space. No one could touch it. No one could manipulate it. For the first time, I felt completely in control of my life. So if you're going through this story, you are not alone. Sometimes the way to protect yourself is not to walk away, not to abandon yourself. It is to return to yourself. And when you return to yourself, you find what you're looking for most, the weight of his own being. It was raining when the phone rang. The sky was as gray as the words. When I saw Olivia's name on the screen, I felt an emotion I couldn't define. Not anger, not longing. Maybe it was just an echo from the silence. When you can only talk to the person you were once closest to in the echo of sentences, something is broken in that relationship. I answered. The first word in his voice caught me off guard. Hello? I had heard that tone 100 times before. Cheerful, light, as if everything was fine. But this time, something was different. The lightness in his voice was replaced by a timid seriousness. Can we talk? I'm listening, I said after a short pause. Years seemed to pass in that 1 second gap. Everything that happened between us, every sentence that was left incomplete, every word that was left unsaid, was squeezed into that moment. Minus I didn't know everything, Claire. I mean, what I was told, what my mother told me. I believed it all. I didn't realize it then, but now I see that I've always heard things from one side. I kept quiet. I could hear what they were saying, but a door inside me wouldn't open fully. Because sometimes late understanding can tire you more than apologies. Mom, you never knew what was explained to you, Olivia, because she didn't tell you. She just guided me, but I never did. Yeah, I guess I went along with it too easily. This confession, as it came out of her mouth, was not a show of conscience. It was more like a belated realization. But still, it didn't immediately heal the wound inside me. Claire, after what we talked about my grandfather and that painting, I didn't mean to hurt you, but I think I did a lot without realizing it. I closed my eyes for a moment, and his statement was different from all the I didn't mean it defenses of the past. It was the first time he took responsibility, but there was still a gap between us. That invisible gap between what was said and what was done. You know, Olivia, sometimes someone doesn't have to be bad. Silence can hurt too. Sometimes doing nothing is hurtful enough. You're right, it's just 2 words. But it gave me a strange calm. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was just the cessation of the war. There was silence on the other end of the phone now. But this time, the silence was not a disconnect, but the weight of 2 people weighing the past. I started therapy, I said. Olivia exhaled as if surprised. It seems to have helped. You're speaking more clearly. I smiled, but she couldn't see it. I'm learning to stand my ground now. So, will I see you again? His question was bold, but my answer was clear. Maybe, but this time I'll decide. That sentence was a small victory for me, because for the first time I was setting the boundary not to balance the relationship, but to protect myself. Thank you for listening, Olivia said as we said goodbye. I just said, take care. When the phone went dead, there was still a silent space between us. But that space didn't scare me anymore, because for the first time, there was a balance in that space. Not uncertainty, but a conscious distance. Sometimes the ties that tire you the most are the ones you feel you belong to the most. And sometimes when one of those ties finally starts to hear you, it's still not the same. Because some ruptures are only silently carried, even if they are spoken. This time the family meeting was held at the summer house, the stone-walled, sea-scented house that had been my grandfather's, but now only Olivia's name was on the deed. The bougainvillea in the garden was still the same, but the feeling inside was different. This time I was going there as someone, not a big sister, not a stabilizer, not a fixer. Claire. Claire who draws boundaries, who doesn't back down, who now wants to make herself visible. At the table were my mom, my dad, Olivia, and me, just the four of us. But in the center of the table was an invisible fifth, the past. And this time, that past was going to be recorded. I had brought a small tape recorder with me. I turned it on without telling anyone. This was not a game. It was a reflex to protect my own truth. Because some words cannot be heard at that moment. It is only when they are listened to again that their echo is understood, and some silences are the greatest witnesses to years of distorted stories. Olivia started the conversation. It's been a difficult time for all of us, especially the last few months. But nothing will get better if we don't talk. My mother bowed her head. Dad pressed his lips together. Everyone reacted in turn, as if they were following a script. I just listened. And then, when I couldn't take it anymore, I asked quietly, "Mom, who do you think Grandpa wanted to leave that painting to?" There was no answer, not even eye to eye. "Didn't you tell Olivia that Claire wouldn't understand?" Mom turned her head away. "I didn't say that." And that's when the presence of the tape recorder became strong in me, because I realized that some people will only deny the truth if they can't hear it. So everything had to be heard now. Olivia stepped in. "Mom, when I sent you that email, you approved it. You said he wouldn't be interested anyway." "I remember." Mom grimaced. "Please don't attribute your conversations to me. I just wanted everyone to have peace." Peace. I was expected to keep quiet for peace. I don't retreat for peace. To give up for peace. But now I realized that peace was only for some. What about my grandfather's notebook? "Do you know what he wrote about me in that notebook, Mom?" My mother looked at me for the first time. There was a hesitant softening in her eyes. "I don't know. But you might be exaggerating, Claire. You have a habit of making a big deal out of everything." That's where the sentence stopped. Because that exaggeration was my existence. I had carried it for years, not by exaggerating, but by keeping quiet. I didn't want to be magnified. I wanted to be seen. No one still knew that the device was recording, but the tone of the conversations began to change. Because for the first time, someone was using words like documents. And that person was me. I said, "I don't just feel anymore. I'm saying it now. I'm writing now. And now everything is on record because I am a witness in this story. This silence no longer belongs to you." At that moment, my mother felt like saying something, but she kept silent. The silence exposed years of manipulation. Olivia didn't avert her eyes this time. Her father's lips parted. "Claire, we thought you were so strong. We thought you would always hold on. But we didn't understand you." It's the first time I've ever heard my father say that. And it was neither diminishing nor compensating. It was a confession of the truth. At the end of that day, I turned off the device. I didn't let anyone listen to those recordings. Maybe I never will, but I know. What I feel is no longer just in me. Now those feelings are audible, documented, and written. My grandfather's painting now hangs on my living room wall, in the same frame, cracked. There is a thin crack coming down from the upper left corner of the frame. Maybe it happened in transit, maybe they bumped into it years ago when they moved it around the house. When Olivia gave me the painting, she said, "The frame is in bad shape. You can have it replaced if you want." But I didn't, because that break no longer felt like a defect to me. It felt like a sign. Some things should stay as they are. Some cracks are a manifestation of the truth, and this painting This painting was no longer just a memory. It was a testimony, a reminder. A reminder of who I was, what I had been through, what silences I had swallowed. The butterfly is still there, in the bottom left corner. Not at the level of the crack, but my eyes always go there. Because that butterfly was the first sign of myself. And the crack was the mark of the tremors that self had gone through. Olivia and I texted a few times after that day. She called. I answered, but I didn't prolong it. She wanted to reach me, but she didn't know how anymore. Because I wasn't the same anymore. I was always the calm, reasonable, solvent Claire. I had left that role. My relationship with her was like a glass. For years it cracked and leaked, but we thought it was still drinkable. Now maybe we didn't change the glass, but we emptied the water out of it. Now there is emptiness in that glass, and that emptiness is much more honest than a false intimacy. One day he texted me, "Can everything go back to normal?" I just wrote this sentence. Not back to normal, back to reality, with a clean slate but with an unrepaired past. He wrote back, "I understand." Maybe he didn't understand, maybe he just accepted it. But this time, it wasn't about what he understood. This time, it was about what I wouldn't settle for. My relationship with my mother is more distant. Now, whenever I hear that subtle timbre of manipulation in her tone, I immediately distance myself. I used to feel guilty and step back. Now I just stop. Because some people only recognize you as the old you. Even if they see your new boundaries, they expect you to wear your old roles. But I can't wear that costume anymore. My father, he faced the hardest one, because for years he didn't say anything to avoid trouble. But now he's quieter too. This time, it's not a suppressing silence, but a listening one. And for the first time, I am this close to myself. I look at that painting in the morning when I drink my coffee. Every time I catch a glimpse of that crack. I never think of changing it because I know that frame is no longer missing. It is real. Some things shouldn't be fixed. Some relationships should not be as they were. Some silences should not be unspoken, but accepted. I didn't become sisters with Olivia again. But there's no more competition, no more role sharing, no who's brighter. There's just a simple, delineated, honest distance. And in that distance, I can breathe. The day I moved into my new house, the first thing I did was hang that painting on the living room wall. With its broken frame, I didn't get it fixed. It never even crossed my mind. Because that crack is no longer a defect, it is a testimony. It wasn't only the frame that was broken. Years of silence, invisibility, repressed emotions were all broken, and out of it came me. Real, complete, no longer silenced. I attached a small note right next to the painting, in my handwriting, in my own words. Not in a frame, but directly on the wall. Some frames break, but what's inside becomes clearer. I saw this note every morning, every evening, and every time I thought to myself, this time the story belongs to me. Olivia and I talk less, but more honestly. My mom still doesn't quite understand things, but she doesn't have to anymore, because I don't mold myself according to what she understands. What kept me invisible for years was that I was always waiting for approval. But now I don't look for approval, I look in the mirror. And there is someone in that mirror, tired but clear, broken but solid, quiet but someone of her own. My new house is small, but it's enough for me. Its walls let in light. There are spaces on its shelves, not to store the past, but to write new stories. And for the first time, I'm not afraid of the word space, because some gaps are not abandonment. They are making space. Some silences are not resentment, but a search for peace. And some separations are not losses, but the beginning of healing. When I look back, I see the burdens I have been carrying inside me all these years on the outside. The blank pages of the photo album are no longer a lack, proof of my distance from scenes that don't belong to me. My shadow in my brother's light is no longer worthlessness. It is a sign that I have chosen a different path. And that sentence my grandfather wrote, Claire, quiet but deep. This sentence is no longer a definition, no longer an affirmation. This sentence is my name. If you have fought invisible battles with your brother or sister or your family, and if these battles were fought without words, if you felt alone, if you were not understood even when you were right, if this is your story, now you know. You are not alone, because some victories are silent. No applause, no celebration, but inside they are the strongest. I hung the painting that day, with its broken frame. But a light shone through that crack, and that light made me feel, for the first time in years, like a real home. I was silent, but this time not for silence, but for peace. It was my victory.